I hope somebody with influence listens to this podcast and will engage and do something. There are politics even in something that's that noble. No solution is going to be perfect. It's just it's not possible. I think I would dream as big as you can. Even if you get 80% of the way there, you will have gone much further than if you had a small vision.
Hey, Todd, welcome to the Don't Let the Dream Die podcast. Really excited to have you on today. Todd Womack and I have been friends for a lot of years, and we've been a part of different projects together, the Illuminations Project and many, many other things around the Passion City Church world and Passion Conference world and a lot of other things. And so it's really great to have you on today. Why don't you just kind of introduce yourself to our audience, kind of connect some dots about who you are, what you're working on right now.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for having me. Love being with you and Carmen, and it's an honor to be on your podcast. I am, and I think we're going to talk about it a little while. I spent 17 years in public service. I worked in really on the policy side. I did do some campaign work, but mostly on the policy side, the governing side. And after 17 years ago, about 6 years ago, we started a government affairs shop that, we lobby at the federal level, some at the state level, and are involved in local communities and local projects even, and really help our clients figure out how to, create a roadmap to solve a problem. And usually there's a public policy aspect to that.
Talk to me a little bit about how you got into public policy and, what that trajectory looked like for yourself.
It's interesting as I think about dreams. I can remember back to even grade school, I was interested in politics. It's ridiculous sounding, but I would sign, you'd write your name on your paper and I'd write the president underneath my signature or whatever. And so I always had an interest. I was not from a political family. Nobody really in my trajectory had been in government. So I didn't really know how I would get there. As time went on, I had a communications background and thought government would be interesting, but didn't have really the connections or the opening to really pursue it. So I just kind of set that aside and began my career in healthcare on the communication side. A friend of mine let me know that a guy that he had worked for had just been elected mayor of the community we lived in, and in Chattanooga, and asked if I wanted to come be his communications director, or if I would like to be considered for it. Right. And I said no. We were pregnant with our first child, and it just didn't make sense. So he gave him my resume despite that, and they called, and the guy was Bob Corker, who became mayor. It was really a super impactful time in the community. He ended up hiring me, and I'm so grateful that he did. And I began to see what a difference you can make when you really have a visionary leader who can rally the community around big ideas. You can transform a community. He went on from there. Bill Frist was Senate Majority Leader and from Tennessee. He had term limited himself, and so he came and recruited Corker to run for his seat in the Senate. Most people thought Corker would be governor next. And Corker was a business guy. He wasn't really a politician. And so he wasn't necessarily looking for the next political job, but the circumstances worked. And so I went with him and was his chief of staff in the United States Senate. but it wasn't a normal path. We had a lot of young people who worked for us who went straight from school to DC, which is more, the normal path, I guess. Right. But mine was a little more circuitous.
Yeah. And so eventually you make your way to DC, and you're part of Senator Corker's staff there as his chief of staff. And that's really kind of where our worlds collided. At least that's the first time I remember our worlds colliding. And, in the Passion movement, we were a part of a thing called End It Movement, and helped kind of bring that awareness campaign to life through our conferences and things like that. But then, simultaneously, I guess you're kind of watching that, and the senator's kind of watching that. And so just kind of catch us up, because ultimately, the long story short is there was some very significant legislation that was passed, and those two things kind of, worked hand in hand. But kind of connect the dots for us on that, and how, from your vantage point, how all that ended up coalescing, because there's a lot of different people involved in kind of seeing that all come together.
Yeah, it was a really interesting time. We had, Corker had just become chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it was a pretty quick ascent to chair a committee in the United States Senate. And he was not he didn't have a foreign relations background, but he threw himself into that. We ended up going to many countries in a very short period of time to meet with other world leaders, just to get a sense of, the big issues that we needed to be aware of. He felt, and I think it was true, being on the ground in a country really helps you understand the people and all of that. And we were putting together an agenda, what do we think needs that we need the committee to focus on during his tenure as chair. During that time, would come to Atlanta occasionally, and got introduced to Passion City Church, and it was a really impactful Sunday. The first Sunday we came, it was just a real breath of fresh air. Really, as you pulled into the parking lot, it really was just a different place.
Was the first meeting the meeting that Bobby Reagan had put together?
No, it was Katie and I came.
Oh, it just came. Okay, all right.
Yeah, that probably 2 years before that.
Okay,
and
all right.
I began. I couldn't be there on Sundays, but I began listening to podcasts and really changed my perspective on a lot of things. But one of I bumped into a podcast from a guy named Gary Haugen, who had spoken at Passion City, and he began to talk about, he really opened my eyes. I was by then was leading the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he said, there are 27 million people enslaved in the world. And it was a startling statistic, because I thought that we dealt with slavery, and that, and so laid out the work that IJM, the organization he led, was doing. And at the end of that podcast, I remember I was running one morning around the Capitol as I listened to it. He said, the God's plan for justice in this world is really a kind of a crazy plan. It's actually you and me. And what are you going to do? He was saying this to the congregation months before, to impact this scourge of slavery that still exists around the world. I remember thinking, I hope somebody with influence listens to this podcast and will engage and do something. And that was my first thought, literally. And my next thought was, wait a minute, maybe I've got some influence that I could, add to this. So we actually called IJM into our office, and we said, what are the big ideas around what you're doing that we could be helpful with? And then I called down to Passion. Y'all had started the Red X End It movement, and we said, how can we be helpful? And I think when y'all first got the call, you were like, politicians often, or a political leader calling, I'm not sure we want to engage, but you did, and we were able together to put together a piece of legislation. The original intention was that we're going to create a global fund around modern slavery. It became far more difficult than we ever expected. There are politics even in something that's that noble. It's not that people don't want to make the world a better place, but they all have different views of how how that would happen. And interestingly, I was shocked by this, but abortion politics got very tied up in it, because sometimes you end up, you have different people who want restrictions on abortion, and you're dealing with, especially sex trafficking, that can be an issue. And that really delayed us. I mean, it really slowed us down as we tried to navigate that. I remember being in a conversation with somebody, asking them, how many times have you dealt with abortion in survivors that you've encountered? And I think it was one time, and because usually the traffickers don't want the person they're trafficking to be pregnant, It was an interesting. You get stuck on a social issue like that that's very important, but it slowed us down a bunch. We did get the legislation across the finish line, but in the process, what we really found is there were so many people in the United States Senate and in the House, throughout the administration, who like me had no idea that modern slavery was still a thing or an issue. It was during that time the first Trump presidency began, and we went and met with Ivanka Trump, and she again didn't know that slavery was an issue, and so she was able to really grab the mantle and has been active in the movement. The United Nations, we ended up being able to help them understand the issue in a meaningful way. So the legislation has caused a lot more money to be available for organizations who are doing amazing work around the country. It's not as powerful as we'd hoped it would be, the legislative piece, but what is actually more powerful than we ever expected is the awareness part. And leaders, people in power, understanding this issue exists. And I do think there's a sea change in terms of the number of people who are aware that modern slavery is an issue that we've got to eradicate, and hopefully in our lifetime. And I think probably the work we all were able to do together really helped drive that home.
Yeah. So, we're several years from this being passed, and you're able to now, from a different vantage point, probably look back and reflect. I mean, what are some of the lessons that you've learned through just that experience? And that experience really is just a microcosm over your career, which we'll get to in just a moment. But just what are some of the lessons, like if you'd known way back when you were getting started, the things you know now, like is there anything you would have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's easy to be naive as you walk into what seems like just a layup of an issue, but when you're involved, I think, in public policy, and we all are in some, we all live under policies, good or bad, that get made. They're all, imperfect solutions, and so you look at the idea around we want to there to be more money globally, other countries putting money into ending slavery. Who could be against that, right? And I think as we got into it, you start to you bump into really tough issues that even within something that's that obvious, that no brainer, an issue to go try to solve, that people want it done their way. And so part, I think, of figuring out how to make the dream become reality is figuring out how to bring people together around a big idea. And then how do you solve those nitty kinds of issues that can derail things? I mean, I think, and it's part of when Washington doesn't work well, it's partly because you've got people who want 100% of their way, and they don't want to give anything to another side. No solution is going to be perfect. It's just not. It's not possible. And so I think even in that, for me, understanding, an issue like this is going to have lots of sides to it. The other part of that is it took a lot longer than we expected. And there were several times that folks were saying, we need to stop. We're not going to be able to get this across the finish line. And I think tenacity and really a big vision kind of gives gives you the staying power to deal with those really tough times.
So a lot of times in like dream architecture, as I think about like dreams becoming reality, I mean, there's a crucible moment. There's a moment where it's like, we should throw in the towel, or we need to keep going. You know, was there a crucible moment when it came to this legislation?
There actually were several, and again, times that we weren't sure that we could get it across the finish line. We ended up, it ended up passing on a must-pass piece of legislation called the NDAA that passes every year. And we had to give up a standalone bill, which would have been more fun, right? We had to give up the dream of that and put the tenets of this legislation in a larger bill that covered military raises, all kinds of things. And so I think convincing, it was really John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Bob Corker, all in a room, and Senator McCain at that time was the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We also had one member of Congress on the House side who was very concerned about the abortion issue, and it was really getting the three of them and him in a room and figuring out how we could address his concern, how we could create, guardrails that would prevent abortions from happening through the legislation passing that got us across the finish line. But it took getting everybody in a room and hashing it out. But it was last minute. I mean, it was going to go to the floor in a few hours. If we didn't get it figured out then, it wasn't going to happen.
I think it's an interesting point just to think about. There's the original dream in its purest format, and then there's the thing that actually got passed. But in a world with a lot of complexity and, theologically, I'd say in a world that's broken,
right.
The thing that you have in your mind in its most holistic, purest format isn't ultimately the thing that actually gets done, but the thing that actually gets done is still very worth it. Would you say that? Yeah.
And, the other thing, I think that's exactly right. And you also, to go to look at it through a theological prism, you don't know what other things are kind of happening that are outside of your purview. I think, this was a 2 or 3 year process, and through it, we had to go educate lots of people. Right. We had to, we built a coalition of people who became more engaged than they would have otherwise. I think if it had been easy, the awareness that ultimately was more powerful than the legislation probably wouldn't have happened. Mm-hmm. So we were, slogging through really difficult issues and whatever, but I'm not sure that actually was better than getting an easy win. Right. I don't think it would have had the same impact in terms of people's awareness, their education, their understanding, and ultimately that's what's had staying power.
It feels like there's a part of it where you've as the dreamer, you've got to maintain a high level of conviction about the thing that you're doing, and at some point, the thing that you're doing isn't the thing that you want to see done if you let too much go.
That's right.
But at the same time, you realize there are edges that are going to have to be smoothed out, or you're not going to be able to build a coalition. So I think as you think about people that are tuning into this, they've got all kinds of dreams. It's not necessarily legislation, but they've got something that may be in a very pure format right now, and they're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I balance, what do I give up and it still remain the essence of the dream, but yet but I know I'm going to have to get other people in a room in order to move this thing forward. How would are there lenses that you think would be helpful for people to think about as they, again, try to hold on to the purity of it, but yet I got to get this thing done?
I think I would dream as big as you can. And, you can have a small vision or you can have a really big vision. And some people are afraid to pursue the bigger thing because they may fail, and you might. But what I've found in life, and I think this is true, I think about legislative politics, if you can create a really, really big vision and you throw yourself at it, even if you get 80% of the way there, you will have gone much further than if you had a small vision, right? I mean, that truly is how it works. And then the other piece of that, I think, is I think about legislation. I don't have my ideas are my ideas, and they are flawed, and they are not the best. So when you start getting people in a room and you create a really big vision, it attracts the best and the brightest. And we are not all going to have the same perspective on how something should ultimately look when it's done. And so I think part of it is don't be afraid to let go of things that are not absolutely essential. 80% of my vision being enacted is where I compromise with others but get it done is a lot better than 0% where I just say I'm not compromising at all. So much of life is about compromise. That doesn't sound all that you would put that on a bumper sticker, right. but it's important. If you're compromising, it means that you've drawn somebody else into the conversation, right? Hopefully a lot of people into the conversation. It's a big enough idea that it deserves debate, and your compromise might actually make it better because, again, I don't have any kind of monopoly on the.
It seems like that word compromise is a word that we have almost completely lost in our modern vernacular when it comes to at least the political side of things. But as you kind of look at it, because you've been out of DC now for a while, and I know you still have connections there and do a lot of work, but as far as the role you were in, but it feels like to me that getting people in the room to work on stuff like that's a bygone era. Am I incorrect in thinking that way, or is that perception somewhat real, or do you see hope in people working together to accomplish big things in the political arena?
Yeah, I mean, it still happens, but you just look at the legislation that moves through Congress. It used to be a lot of standalone pieces of legislation would move because, people allowed the process to work and something passed or didn't pass, but it at least got a hearing. And now we're down to probably 5 or 6 big, huge bills that pass every year. One's an appropriations bill that funds government. One's the Defense Authorization Act, and maybe 3 or 4 others. But that's kind of it. Which tells you that there are people who are in the Senate, especially one senator can put the brakes on everything, and so it tells you that people are saying it's my way or we're not going to have legislative outcomes, and you can argue whether that's good or bad, but there's not as much of that that's going on for sure, and it's because 1 or 2 people can stop everything, and that's not great for our country. I mean, so what ends up happening is, like we even did, you take all these ideas and throw them into a big, huge piece of that's why you have multi-thousand-page bills, is because we're not kind of doing the work all the way through. Howard Baker, who was from my state, was Senate Majority Leader for a long time, and he had a couple things he would do. He kept an open bar in his office, so people would come by after 5, and they would sit and talk. Democrats, Republicans, they would get to know each other. They'd know something about each other's family. It's a lot harder to demagogue somebody who and so that was a priority for him. The other thing he said, I always look through the prism of, the other guy might be right.
Right. And
so that was how he said, so when I would go into a conversation, I would say, I need to go in this conversation thinking Aaron might be right. He may disagree with me, but what if I'm wrong and he's right? And if you kind of approach life that way, where you realize that, there's some humility and you're open to other ideas making your dream better, I just think you get a lot better outcome.
Yeah. So you've been out of DC officially. You started Bridge Public Affairs after in 2019, after your time in DC with Senator Corker. So to a large degree, your job is to help other people's dreams become reality. They're working on a problem or they're trying to solve something, and your experience is able to interject into that. So I want to talk about that for a second, but then I want to talk about kind of big picture. Like, what is Todd Womack's dream? And are you working towards something? Are you living in the midst of the dream right now? I'd love to talk about that. But before we get to that, let's talk about, Bridge and the work that you're doing and helping, your clients and the people you work with, helping their dreams, solve their problems, help their things that they're thinking about become reality.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's been a great season. I wasn't necessarily ready to leave that world, but when Senator Corker decided to retire, it felt like a good exit point, and we were able to put together an amazing team of people, and so much of what we do and are able to accomplish is about them and the work they do, and we've got a great group of clients, and so I think taking on projects that are being done or being contemplated by great clients is been helpful to our success. But yeah, so we're called multi-client, which means that we don't just focus in one sector, but we kind of take all comers. We learn a lot about what their business is, what they're trying to do. We've got multinational companies, but we've also got developers who are trying to build projects or whatever. So it's a pretty wide range in the energy, the healthcare, technology, et cetera, space, and so much of it is about, sometimes it's about stopping bad regulation or a piece of legislation that's going to hurt them. So a lot of that's education.
Right.
And then some of it is, hey, we want to create a new legislative vehicle to accomplish a goal of for the company. And so the fun part of that is learning their business and then figuring out how we can build a roadmap to get them to their ultimate goal. And sometimes, as we go down that path, as we chart that out, we find that it opens doors we never expected and builds advocates we never expected. So much what we do is a relationship business where we are introducing them to people who need to care about what it is that they, their company, their business, their nonprofit does, who can actually take the original objective. It often gets turned into something bigger and better than we expect.
Yeah. So as you're thinking about, as we kind of bring our time together to a close, I mean, as you think about the future and things you're excited about working on, what do you see in the horizon? What gets you fired up? What are you passionate about these days?
I really love what I do, and I still don't know that I have figured out exactly what I want to do when I grow up, which I'm at a point I probably need to figure that out. But part of the joy of the career I've had, and really the career you've had, is being open to new things. Mm-hmm. And we both work with clients, companies, and I feel like I get glimpses into lots of different worlds that we get to know people, help them with their issue or whatever. I really couldn't be be happier. I feel like God's really placed us where He's got us. We've got a great team who helps with that. So really, I think we want to just continue to move the needle. One nice thing about what I do, the thing you read about or you watch on television in the morning that's controversial and gets your blood pressure up is probably not where we're doing our work. Now, it was exactly what I had to deal with when I was in it. But now we're working around the edges, the places where government really works at whatever level we're working at. And there's a lot of good stuff happening. There are a lot of great people who are in government. I hope more people will consider spending some time in public service, because it really makes a difference. And so, helping folks enter that arena is something that I would have interest in as time goes on, but also helping our clients reach good conclusions.
Yeah. Do you, what would your encouragement be to people that are thinking about public service? Because it does feel like we're in a moment in time where, the good people are kind of like, hey, that's not for me, or I don't know that I want to put my family through that, or I want to get into that conversation.
It kind of depends on what you want to do. I mean, I think executive roles, if you can again create a big vision, a big dream, and you can rally people around it, you can make those things happen, especially if you're in an executive role. And so if you've got that kind of inclination, I would absolutely say figure out what you want to do with it, because I will say, a lot of politics are thought about in 4 and 6 and 8 year terms, but that time frame moves fast. So know what you want to do before you go into it. And then on the legislative side, it is a morass. It's difficult, but what I think we learned is that if you can figure out what subject matter you want to really be expert in, and you can master that, and that's putting lots of time. It's traveling to places where that work is being done or whatever. You all of a sudden become the person in the room when that subject matter comes up for consideration that everybody looks to. What does Aaron think about that? He's put the time, he's put the energy into it. So become an expert at something if you're going to go into it, and you can have an enormous impact. I will say at the federal level, state level, even local level, the ripple of of the policies that are put in place have huge impact around the world. So you can, in a pretty quick period of time, have a massive impact. And then you can go back and do something in the private sector, but it really can be a powerful way to really achieve an outcome that brings great satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, Todd, thank you so much for this conversation. Super enlightening and hopefully encouraging to everybody listening. Whether you feel like your dream is massive on a legislative scale or on a business scale or whatever it is that you're trying to think through, I know there's things that we've talked about today that are super important and encouraging to people. So thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us and encouraging everybody.
Thanks for having me. A lot of fun. Thanks,
Absolutely. All right. Thanks a lot.